Much better. So what is a database? It is essentially an organized collection of structured information, and it is often controlled through database management systems, or DBMS. It is commonly modeled to contain tabular data, which is basically data that exists in tables of rows and columns. And that data can be written, read, updated, and deleted through SQL, which is structured query language. Common database management systems, I'm sure you're familiar with a few of these as well, would include MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, Postgres, SQLite, MongoDB, Redis, etc. And the other half of today's lesson will be covering CSVs. The basic difference is databases are dynamic systems for containing data in multiple structures, whereas CSV is a static format for containing data as a single file. And can somebody here tell me what CSV stands for?
Comma separated value. I learned that this weekend, so I really want to say that.
Right on. Thank you, Harry. That's exactly correct. CSV is comma separated values. And it is essentially a really simple data format. It's delimited, meaning boundaries are specified through a character, most commonly commas or spaces. CSV is used for data manipulation, and just like a database, the data storage is tabular. Data exists in a table that can decompose into rows and columns. Its simplicity is what makes it very accessible and easy to use, both by humans and by applications. It's viewable by virtually any text editor, and it's simple to parse through, relatively speaking, compared to XML or JSON. It's fast and easy to read to and write. It's memory efficient and compact. These are the benefits of CSV. And a bit of history on it. It's simple. It's so simple that it's existed for a very long time. The format existed before the first personal computer even came out. So the compiler that first utilized it was designed in 1972, and the free-form input-output wasn't defined until later in 1978. CSV is not held to an enforced standard, but a standard has been proposed, and that is RFC 4180, proposed in 2005. Basically, because CSV is not enforced to any exact standard, there can be variations in how applications interpret CSV files. So the point of proposing the standards is to try and create consistency and to regulate expectations when working with CSVs. Unfortunately, because it is not enforced, it is really just a set of recommended guidelines that software developers can either follow or ignore. But the standards are CSV files are always delimited. That is, they are separated by a comma character. Records and rows are terminated by new lines. Specific character encoding, byte order, or terminator format is not necessarily required. So a terminator could be a new line, it could be a return, it could be a variety of things. Fields with embedded line breaks must be quoted so as to be distinctly recognized by software as embedded data within a field. Basically, you could have a line break inside a field, inside a row, but if the application that is reading your CSV is not following the standard, it may not necessarily understand what to do with that line break. Leading and trailing spaces and tabs are considered part of a field and must not be ignored. So even if it is outside, well, we'll get there in a future slide, but basically an application might either read the space or the tab as being part of the value in the field, or it will ignore it, which is called trimming. And finally, header records are optional. So why understand CSV standards? One simple case would be to be able to write application that can handle different use cases by different teams. So for example, a software engineer is writing and testing an application from the terminal to handle CSVs containing customer records. The fraud team submits CSVs to this application generated from Excel, so the application breaks. The software engineers release a fix, but next thing you know, when the lead generation team submits a CSV, which is generated in Mac OS, in Mac OS numbers specifically, the application breaks. This is because Excel and Mac OS may process CSVs differently. So knowing ahead of time that CSVs aren't officially standardized, case-specific functionality can be implemented. Basically, there are variations in how information can be passed in through a CSV. So you want to be mindful of how you write your application to interpret that data. Like mentioned earlier, trailing space may be read by one application, but ignored by another. This is why the standards that have been proposed recommend the use of quotations when including white spaces or line breaks inside of a field. Other common CSV conflicts, again, there are the support of embedded line breaks. So one application might not realize or might not interpret this as being a line break. And so it renders this as a single line, which might not be the intended behavior. Let's say you have a front end for a car listing website. You wanted to have a line break specified within your field. Depending on the application that is reading the CSV data, it may interpret it incorrectly, treating it as a value in the field. So however you intend your application to behave, you just want to be mindful of how the CSV data is going to be passed in, which determines how you're going to want to parse through it. So one last example could be the optional headers. If you expect that your users will be submitting CSV files with headers included, you want to be able to account for those scenarios. Again, this is not enforced. It's actually, even within the proposed standards, it's an optional. It's optional. It's not exactly a rule that you should have, a requirement that you should have headers. And again, because standards aren't enforced, you as the application programmer need to be mindful of the use cases that you'll be dealing with. All right, so let's move on from the slides to today's lesson. Does anyone have any questions so far?
If it is so cumbersome and there's no standard, why use them then?
Well, because CSVs are still a very simple data format. It's, like I mentioned, it could be read by virtually any text editor. A CSV is nothing more than words separated by commas. So the problem is, because it's so simple, it's virtually impossible to enforce a standard. So you just have to be mindful of the little variations that could affect how your code interprets a CSV file, or how users may submit a CSV file even. One person might like to include trailing spaces. Another person on that same team may know not to. Does that answer your question? Cool. All right, switching to today's lesson. Let me know if this is too small. A lot of the same stuff so far. Basically, this README goes over what we just reviewed through the slides. A database is a system of storing and organizing information. We query databases using SQL, which will be covered in more detail next week. And For today's demonstration, we will be reading and writing to and from a CSV file. So let's say we have an NFL team's CSV file with the following data. We could import a package, a built-in package called CSV to manipulate the data within this CSV. And if we were to write this code out and run it, we would get this output. So let's actually, it's not going to let me split. Let me actually switch windows again. So we could demo this live instead of just reading through it. Okay. Where is this window? Cool. So let's create a new file called NFL DB. Let's import our CSV library. And I just want to make sure that I'm sharing the right screen. And again, if this is too small, let me know. Just feel free to speak up. We are going to import CSV, and then we are going to write out some basic syntax using this library with open an NFL teams.csv, which, by the way, you could just create straight from your terminal. So let's say you wanted to create a CSV file. You just create that file. I already have this file, so I'm going to name it CSV2. And from there, you just add the values that you want. In this case, we want a CSV of various NFL teams, and we want to include headers. Our headers are going to be an ID, a team, wins, and losses. And the first row is going to be Patriots with 10 wins, 2 losses. And we've got the Chicago Bears with only 2 wins and 10 losses. And then we got the Jets with an even 5-5. You save your file. And now going back to our Python script, we could open that file. The next part of this would be to open it as you write out a parameter. In this case, I'm just going to call it CSV_file. And then we're going to create a CSV reader object. So I'm going to assign that to this new variable that I'm creating, CSV reader. And the CSV reader object is accessed from CSV, a method called reader within CSV. And then we're going to pass it that CSV file that we were opening in the line above. Next, we're going to iterate through the rows in this file. So for row in CSV reader, your CSV reader object, we are going to print the row. And let's save and let's run this. And as you can see, we are able to read the contents of our CSV file. So one other thing to note is we have the option of displaying this data in another way. For example, if we were to use a different method from within the CSV library, dict reader, for example, for reading dictionaries, we would be able to render the same data as a dictionary. And you see the headers aren't included as the first line, but instead are built into the dictionary. In the CSV classes in the library, there are various modes. By default, it's going to utilize R for read, but when you write your code, you have the option of overriding that default value. For example, if we wanted to be able to write to our file, we pass in another parameter, W for mode. This now should allow us to write into our CSV file. So let's comment this out. And let's write NFL writer equals CSV. Again, this is the CSV library. We're going to be using the writer method, and we'll be passing in that CSV file, which, by the way, I need to rename here. Then we're going to write a row. We're going to add a new row. And let's say we have the Giants. We're going to have 6 wins, 4 losses. And let's do one more. Now we'll have Lions with 8 wins and 2 losses. So before I run this, can anyone take a guess as to what will happen next?
It's going to add those 2 lines to the CSV file.
Okay, got one guess for adding 2 new lines.
Will it write the entire file and just put those 2 lines in it?
Let's find out. So now I'm going to run this file again. And now I'm going to run it to read. So let's see what's happened to that CSV file. Whoops. We need to rename that to NFL file. Run it again. Something field name. What am I missing here? Can anyone tell me what I am missing?
You have to change it to R from W.
Yeah, is no right on line 3. The mode.
Let's try removing this because we're trying to read and not write. So let's actually replace that with R. Now let's try this again. Still doesn't like what's happening. Oof. Did we overwrite the file completely? Let's take a look. Yep, it looks like this file is empty. So when we were writing, it didn't even write these 2 lines. So let's see, why did it not write these 2 lines? Okay, we are opening the NFL_teams2 CSV. We are setting the mode to write. We are opening it as an NFL file. We create a CSV writer object called NFL writer. We pass it in the NFL file. And from this writer, we call the write row. We pass in a row for it to write. We do it again. So let's run this and see if it generates anything. There you go. It generated the data. Not sure what deleted it, but it could have been when I tried to read, but still had mode set to W. So let's remove that and let's try to read again. We are now able to read the data that we passed in. So Ken, you were right. It overwrote the data that was in there previously. It did not write, it did not include, or sorry, I should say, it did not append the 2 additional rows. Instead, it just overwrote everything inside of it. And that is because if you were to follow the README, there is a table showing the various modes available in the CSV class. Write, W is specifically for write. And there is a different mode called append, which we access through the letter A. So let's say mode equals A. And let's go back to our CSV file. And let's just re-add the original data. Now, when we write to this, we should be able to see that it adds the lines as opposed to overwriting what's in there. Now let's try reading it again. As you can see, we have 4 entries. It looks like the 4th entry got included in the 3rd line. So let's take a look at our CSV. Does anyone have a guess as to why this happened?
Did you need to put a new line before
Philip, I
appending?
see your lips moving, but I believe you're muted.
Oh, can you hear me now? No.
No, I think that's on your side.
Yeah, I could hear him just
Or am I
fine.
muted?
Oh,
We
okay.
can all hear
Yeah, I was
Hello?
confused.
Can I hear
Thought my
any of you?
headset died.
He was saying, is it because he's a new line character?
Yes, it is missing. It was missing a new line. So I believe when I copy and pasted, a new line was not included. So this code basically just added these 2 lines, but it started with this in the existing final line being the line with ID set to 3.
So the quick question, the as NFL file, is that just kind of a variable you're choosing?
Yes, this specifically, right?
Yes.
Yep, it's just a variable that I'm choosing. In the example earlier, it was just named CSV file. Basically, when you are calling this open parameter from CSV, you are passing it the name of the file, but you also have to define the object within your instance of Python that it's going to exist as. And that's what this NFL file is.
Okay.
When you put in R or W, do you have to put mode before it?
Yes, because otherwise it won't know what parameter to record that under.
I'm looking at the docs on Python and I could be wrong, but it looks like they added the W with no mode, and then right after that they did new line equals quotes
Okay,
in the parameters.
cool. Let's take a look at that documentation. Link me to it.
Yep.
I definitely do not have all these built-in methods memorized. I don't think anyone should. So if it allows you to do that, that is awesome. Where is...
Like half a page down.
Okay, I am trying to pull it up.
You talking about the eggs CSV?
Ah, interesting. I see you're right. So in this paragraph, it's saying a short usage under a short usage example, it's passing in W as just a parameter. Interesting. The general rule of thumb is when you are passing in a parameter, you might want to define that parameter, but if it's designed in a way that you don't have to do that, then save yourself a few seconds and don't include it. All right, let's see. The rest of this exercise is pretty straightforward. I believe it's just doing the same thing. We wrote to the CSV, we then appended to the CSV. There's only one challenge today. It's called word guess CSV. We'll do that later, but before we do, I'll just have all of you run through the README and practice this on your own. Just practice creating your own CSV file and practice creating a basic script to read, write, and append to that CSV file. Stretch goal and bonus points if you want to turn it into a class and then demonstrate for us when we reconvene how your class works. Sound good? Cool. So let me switch back to this other screen. Any final questions about this exercise? Cool. Let's go ahead. Feel free to take a break, come back in 10 or 15 minutes, get started on the exercise, run through, and then we will reconvene at 7 o'clock.